We are considering in logic the figures of categorical syllogism and what is a figure and the types of figures we have already seen. Figure is the form of syllogism as determined by the position of the middle term in the premises. And there can be only 4 combinations possible, and that is what we are given. All the 4 figures, 4 combinations, 4 possible positions the middle term can occupy. Now, after having seen the 4 combinations or the 4 figures, we are finding out a few specific rules as a result of applying, or when we apply the general 8 rules to the syllogism, then with regard to each of the figure, some specific rules get emerged. It is the result of the application of the 8 rules. So it will come about. So first and second figure we have already seen what are the rules, and we have shown why it has come about. Now we go to the third figure, that is MP, MS, SP. This is the third figure. So for this third figure, the 2 rules are: the minor must be affirmative, the conclusion must be particular. The minor has to be, now what is the reason? We are just giving an explanation. It's only thinking along with the rules that are given. The minor has to be affirmative, or else the conclusion will be negative and it's be universal. I said it in a shorthand style. If the minor, that means if minor were to be negative, the conclusion will be negative, because the conclusion has to follow the weaker part. If one of the premises is negative, the conclusion will be negative. If the conclusion is negative, then the P in the conclusion will be universal. And if the P in the conclusion is universal, the P in the major premise also has to be universal, because no term in the conclusion can be more extensive than in the premises. So here it is already universal. Therefore, that has to be definitely universal. And how can that be universal? Only by making it negative. Only by making negative premise. And if that is negative, this also will be negative. And then it is both negatives from 2 negative premises. We cannot conclude. Therefore, the minor has to be affirmative. How we are proving? We are proving in negative way, just as we have done in the first case as well. We are saying, first of all, the rule says the minor has to be affirmative. Now we are saying minor has to be affirmative because it is impossible for minor to be negative. Why it's impossible? If the minor were to be negative, if the minor premise were to be negative, the conclusion will be negative. If the conclusion is negative, the P in the conclusion will be universal. If the P in the conclusion is universal, the P here also has to be universal because of the rule we have already studied. And how can the P in the major premise be universal? By making the major premise again a negative premise. Then what is the problem? Both will be negative. That is impossible. Therefore, since it is not possible for minor to be negative, therefore it has to be affirmative. It has to be affirmative. If the minor is affirmative, the conclusion has to be particular to make the yes particular. If the minor is affirmative, then the conclusion has to be particular to make the yes particular, because this is only particular. If the minor is affirmative, yes, the predicate of affirmative propositions are always particular. So this will be particular. If this is particular, naturally this also has to be particular, because no term in the conclusion can be more extensive than in the premises. Here it is only particular. Naturally it cannot be universal. So this also has to be particular, and for which we are saying the conclusion will be particular. Conclusion must be particular. So these are the two rules. It is only just journeying along with that one, and then you find that these rules are, this will be the situation, this will be the reality when we apply all the 8 rules, and which we put in the form of 2 additional rules with regard to the third figure. Then the fourth figure, if one premise, fourth figure is, what is that? Yeah, PM, MS, SP. That is the fourth figure. What are the rules with regard to the fourth figure? If one premise is negative, the major premise must be universal. If one premise is negative, any one premise is negative, the major premise must be universal. If the major is affirmative, the minor premise must be universal. If the minor premise is affirmative, the conclusion must be particular. Now, it is not for studying by heart, but to understand what is that. If one premise is negative, what happens? If one premise is negative, the conclusion will be negative. If the conclusion is negative, the P in the conclusion will be universal. If the P in the conclusion is universal, the P in the major also has to be universal. That is the reason why we say if one premise is negative, the major premise must be universal. Okay, I can only repeat the same thing once more. Nothing more can be done. I just repeat once more. If one premise is negative, we are speaking about this one. If any one premise is negative, then the conclusion will be negative. If the conclusion is negative, the P in the conclusion will be universal. If the P in the conclusion is universal, the P in the major premise also has to be universal, which is possible only by making it a universal proposition. When the subject is universal, the whole premise, then subject is universal, the premise is universal. That is the meaning of if one premise is negative, the major premise must be universal. Second one, if the major is affirmative, might mean major premise is affirmative, the minor premise must be universal. If the major premise is affirmative, PM, if it's affirmative, what happens? Because the M in that will be particular. The predicate of affirmative propositions are always particular. PM, there, if it is affirmative, M will be particular. If M there is particular, the M in the minor premise has to be universal, because the middle term has to be universal at least once. So there it is particular, then this has to be universal. And that is possible only by making that premise a universal premise or a universal statement. So if the major is affirmative, the minor premise must be universal. Third one, if the minor premise is affirmative, the conclusion must be particular. If the minor premise is affirmative, yes, is affirmative, then what happens? We have seen the similar rule. Then yes will be particular. Yes in the minor premise is particular, then yes in the conclusion cannot be universal, it has to be only particular. So therefore, if the minor premise is affirmative, the conclusion will be particular. Again, some are blinking. The minor premise is affirmative, this will be particular because the predicate of affirmative propositions are always particular or undistributed. If this is particular, this also has to be particular. And that means that is equal to saying that a conclusion has to be a particular statement, not universal. So, apparently, it is look very easy, but it is not that difficult. If you have to be focused, and then only then you will understand. Understanding is not a problem. Problem is journeying along with that one without losing the track. And for that we need exclusive attention and understanding. We don't have to repeat again and again that predicate of the negative propositions are always universal. Predicate of the affirmative propositions are always particular. Now we don't have to repeat again and again. Once those things are clear, then I think the various rules as applied to the four figures also will be clear. That is regarding the figures of categorical syllogism. So there are four figures. Yeah. Now we go to another point in the categorical syllogism, the moods of categorical syllogism. The moods. The notes are given in advance so that you come prepared. Otherwise, even with no preparation, you are not able to understand. Therefore, it is highly advisable that you try to understand by yourself. And then the class becomes easier. Yeah. Moods of categorical syllogism. Otherwise, we have to explain every small thing. Now, what is a mood? Something similar to a figure. Mood is again a form of syllogism as determined by the quality and quantity of the three constituent propositions. So here we are not speaking about the position of middle term, the quality and the quantity of the three constituent propositions. There are three propositions are there for each syllogism, and each proposition will have a particular quality or particular quality and quantity. It can be negative, it can be affirmative, it can be universal, it can be particular. So, according to the different quality and quantity of the constituent propositions, the mood is determined by the accordingly. Just as the other one. The figure is determined by the position of the middle term. Here, mood is determined by the quality and quantity of the three constituent propositions. Now we have divided the categorical syllogism, categorical propositions into A, E, I, O. So four kinds of propositions, and there are three propositions in a syllogism and four possible figures. So we're taking all these things together. Thus, by a mathematical calculation, there can be 256 moods. If you just calculate the three constituent propositions the four kinds of propositions, A, E, I, O, and the four figures. When you go on multiplying, then we come to 256 moods are there. 256 different combinations are there according to the different quality and quantity of the constituent propositions in the different moods, in the different figures. And that is then, but out of these only 19 are logically valid. All the moods are not logically correct, logically valid. Only 19 are logically valid. Out of 200, so possible moods are 256. Out of that, only 19 can be logically valid. Now, what we are going to see are the logically valid moods for each of the figure. Logically valid moods for each of the figure. So that is, so altogether there are 19. Now we will see which are the moods with regard to each of the figure. So the first figure is MB, SM, SP. This is the first figure. So in the first figure, there are a few valid moods. And what are they? That is what you are going to see. And we are just not only the figure, but also the specific rules regarding each figure. The specific rules for the first figure is the minor premise must be affirmative, the major premise must be universal. Okay. Now keeping this in mind, we are looking at the valid moods of the first figure. They are These are the valid moods of the first figure. I'll explain. E, A, I, E, I, O. Now what is the meaning of this? The first letter stands for the major premise, the second one for the minor premise, and the third one for the conclusion. And that is the way it is arranged. So for the first figure, the first premise, the major premise will be universal affirmative, minor also universal affirmative, and the conclusion also universal affirmative. One of the valid moods in the first figure. Another one is E. The major premise is universal negative, minor is universal affirmative, and the conclusion is universal negative. Then I. Major, minor, conclusion. Major, minor, conclusion. I don't have to repeat the same thing. It is only. So the three letters are, each letter is standing for the particular quality and quantity. What is the quality? Affirmative. What is the quantity? Universal. So both quantity and quality is expressed by each of the letter. So now this is for the first figure. Now we'll see whether these rules are valid or not. The specific rules are the minor premise must be affirmative. Now see whether the minor premise is affirmative or not. A is affirmative, A is affirmative, I is affirmative, I is affirmative. Then the next one is the major premise must be universal. This is universal, E is universal, A is universal, E is universal. So both the rules with regard to the first figure is found valid with regard to these four moods. These are the four moods. Now these four moods, they are expressed universally with a with a rhyme. Because it is difficult to pronounce the vowels alone. Vowels and consonants should be there. Then it is easy to pronounce. Therefore, all over the world, whatever be the, this is accepted. What these rhymes? And they are Barbara, Celaran, Dari, Ferio. So this is the Latin pronunciation is Latin. So the what is there? You find the A, Barbara, A. Instead of saying A, we put a Barbara mood. Barbara mood is a valid mood in the first figure. Another one is Celaran, E. And that is again another valid mood. Then Celaran, Dari, D-A-I. And fourth one is E-I-O. So, Barbara, Celaran, Dari, Ferio. It's easy to memorize the rhyme rather than the vowels alone. Therefore, it is not each country or each place is not making that kind of rhyme. It is universally accepted rhymes with regard to the valid moods of each of the figure. So, Barbara, Celaran, Dari, Ferio. That is with regard to the first figure. The second figure is PM, SM, SP. PM, SM, SP. And what are the rules? One premise must be negative. The major premise must be universal. So now that we shall see. Before that one, what are the valid moods of the second figure? The valid moods are E. E-I-O, A-O-O. Again, 4. E-A-E, A-E-E, E-I-O, A-O-O. Now, before we can apply the rules and see whether they are found applied with regard to the second figure. What are the rules? The rules are one premise must be negative, the major premise must be universal. One premise must be negative, this is negative, this is negative, this is negative, and this is negative. And the major premise must be universal. This is universal, this is universal, this is universal, this is universal. So, both the rules are found realized in the case of the second figure as well. Now, it is in the form of rhyme. First one was Barbara, Celaran, Dari, Ferio. The second one is Cesare Camestras, Festino, Barocco. Cesare Camestras, Festino, Barocco. So, E-A-E, A-E-E, E-I-O, A-O-O. And that is, so in order to make it easy to memorize, it is put in the form of a rhyme. Cesare Camestras, Festino, Barocco. That is with regard to the second figure. Now we come to the third figure. And the third figure is MP, MS, SP. MP, MS, SP. And in this, what are the valid moods? The valid modes are the following. They are A, I, E, O, O, E, I, O. I, E, O, E, I, O. Before we go to the rhyme, we'll see whether the two rules are found realized. And what are the rules? Minor premise must be affirmative, major premise must be universal. So see, minor premise must be affirmative, 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 affirmative. The major premise must be universal. Sorry. Is that each one you say? The rules are: the minor premise must be affirmative, the conclusion must be particular. So the rule that is given typed there, I think it is wrong. So but what is given in the first is correct. That is, the minor premise must be affirmative, the conclusion must be particular. The minor premise must be affirmative, we have already seen. The conclusion must be particular. So this is particular, this is particular, this is particular, this is particular, this is particular. So both the rules are found realized. Now we are putting in the form of a rhyme with regard to the third figure, that is A, I, all those things. So we are putting it in the form of, the rhyme is the following. Darapti disamis datisi felapton bocardo ferison. Darapti disamis datisi felapton bocardo ferison. So the words do not have any meaning, but in order to get the vowels, these words are coined or made. So these are the five valid moods of the third figure. Now we have the fourth figure. The fourth figure is PM, MS, SP. PM, MS, SP. And the valid moods are the following for the fourth figure. I, E, sorry. I, E, O, E, I, O. I, E, I, E, O, E, I, O. One is missing from the third. Okay. So the third one, sorry, the third valid moods are I, that is not there. So it was AII. AII, and then the rest. Only then we get the 19 altogether. Okay, now we come back again to the fourth figure. So the valid modes are AAI, AEE, IAI, EAO, EIO. Now the rules are, if one premise is negative, the measure must be universal. If one premise is negative, so look at where any premise is negative, nothing. Here there is one premise negative, measure has to be universal. Here nothing is negative. Here one is negative, measure is universal. One is negative, measure is universal. So the first rule is realized. The second one is, if the measure is affirmative, the minor premise must be universal. If the measure is affirmative, the minor must be universal. That is the rule, no? If the measure is affirmative, the minor premise must be universal. If the measure is affirmative, then minor is universal. Measure is affirmative, minor is universal. Measure is affirmative, minor is universal. Here no problem, here also no problem. And the third rule is, if the minor is affirmative, the conclusion must be particular. If the minor is affirmative, the conclusion must be particular. If the minor is affirmative, here is affirmative, and it is particular. It is negative, so we don't have to see. It is affirmative, it is particular. It is affirmative, it is particular. It is affirmative, it is particular. So the rules are found to be realized in all the cases. So only just one I missed in the third figure, and there also in that also the rules are realized. So these are so altogether there are 19 rules, and 19 figures, 19 moods, and 19 moods are the valid moods, and they are distributed among the 4 figures. The first one has 4, second one has got again 4, the third has got 6, and the fourth one has got 5. Then altogether we get 19. So these are the valid moods of the categorical syllogism. And coming to the last rhyme, Brahmandip Kamenas Dimaris Fesapo Phraseson. We can in fact sing the whole thing, all the rhymes together, one after the other. So the last one is Brahmandip Kamenas Dimaris Fesapo Phraseson. The accent has to be placed on the correct syllable. So I just read the whole thing once more. Barbara Chalaran Dari Ferio Cesare Camestras Festino Barocco Darapti Disamis Datisi Felapton Bocardo Ferrison Brahmandip Kamenas Dimaris Fesapo Phraseson. So these are the valid moods of the 4 figures, and altogether there are 19 valid moods. But by mathematical calculation, 256 moods are there. Out of that one, only 19 are valid, which we have given under each of the 4 figures.